For some reason, Oakland has attracted sports' most miserable owners, a collection of frauds, shysters, and crumb bums who could have cared less about the city or their own fans. While these failures were all drawn to the robust Northern California media market, none were bothered to invest, cultivate, or build the roots required to be successful. In other words, rooted in Oakland, these folks were not. Whether it was making one dumbass decision after another, purposely doing things fans hated, or simply not having enough money to be a professional sports owner, Oakland was powerless as sports' most miserable owners took advantage of their support. How does that even happen? How does one city attract such an astounding collection of incompetent owners? Well, before we can answer that question, it's important to learn a little bit about each of these characters individually. Al Davis, his son Mark, and the entire Davis family clan are nothing but a bunch of grifters who go from town to town in search of marks. Al Davis's entire career was built upon lies and telling people lies in hopes of getting what he wanted, whether that be a new stadium or a coaching job or whatever else. In his biography of the late Raiders owner, author Mark Grabowski noted Davis violated NCAA recruiting rules, lied about being the brains behind the innovative Los Angeles Chargers offense, and did many other underhanded things to move up the football career ladder. Hell, dude wasn't even the actual majority owner of the Raiders for most of his life. He wouldn't claim more than a 50% stake in the franchise until 2005, but he was more than happy to tell people he was the owner of the team. Of course, this also meant forcing other stakeholders to go along with whatever his wishes were. The conman's only focus in life was getting what he wanted, a trait eventually passed on to his son. It is why the Raiders franchise moved from Oakland to Los Angeles to Oakland to Las Vegas, while flirting with just about every other city and town in North America in between. Let's be honest here. In a couple of decades, Mark Davis will start complaining about Las Vegas and angle for the team's next eventual relocation. The Davises do nothing but use people and places as means to an end, which is a damn shame considering those people and those places actually love the team. However, this is irrelevant. The only thing that mattered to old Leatherface and the only thing that does matter to his son is getting what they want, and when they don't, all hell, well, it breaks loose. It's why Oakland Coliseum was burdened with Mount Davis despite it making the stadium so much worse for baseball. And what did the city get as thanks for these efforts? Years later, the city would uproot the team from Oakland after making absolutely no attempt to stay. Sorry, that alleged Coliseum City deal being financed by the quote-unquote Prince of Dubai was about as genuine as those $20 NFL jerseys being sold on Wish. Around the same time Al Davis was returning to Oakland after his stint in Los Angeles, Chris Cohan had completed his purchase of the Golden State Warriors. There was a 15-year stretch when Cohan and Los Angeles Clippers owner Donald Sterling seemed to be locked in a battle to see who was the worst NBA owner. These two were truly awful on so many different levels, but let's focus on the man who oversaw the Golden State Warriors between 1994 and 2010. The year prior to assuming ownership of Golden State, the team won 50 games and made the playoffs. They would only qualify for the postseason once during Cohen's ownership. What was he doing during this time? Mostly cycling through incompetent and lazy general managers and head coaches. That was, of course, when Cohen wasn't overruling them to make his own personal terrible decisions. There was the hire of Gary St. Jean as general manager for reasons no one understood at the time. St. Jean had a dreadful stint as Sacramento Kings head coach and was actually out of the NBA for 2 years before landing this role as Warriors GM. An upturned mop with a bucket on its head would have been a better qualified candidate. Don't believe me? Here are some of St. Jean's greatest hits. He drafted O'Donnell Foyle in the lottery, traded Vince Carter for Antoine Jameson and cash, traded the 10th pick in the 1999 NBA draft for the 21st pick, and a 32-year-old Mookie Blaylock. Hired and fired Dave Cowens as head coach, and hired Eric Musselman as head coach. Things did not get much better when St. John was finally relieved of his duties in 2004. There was the comically disastrous stint as Mike Montgomery as head coach. Even the random success of the We Believe side was followed up by more disarray. Don Nelson went on an extended senior spring after that season, while Steven Jackson cashed in with a completely superfluous contract extension personally handed to him by Cohen. But perhaps best of all was when Cohen was dragged to court by the IRS over an unpaid tax bill of $160 million in 2007. He ended up paying over $200 million in taxes, penalties, and interest when everything was said and done. While embarrassing, this would actually force him to sell a team. That is a story which has a very happy ending. Lou Wolf was not a great or even a good owner in the scheme of things, but at least he showed some compassion to the Northern California sports market, albeit with the caveat that this compassion usually involved his property development business making money. For example, he did bring the Earthquakes back to San Jose and get them a new stadium with no public financing. You have to believe had Wolf not sold his stake in the Athletics to John Fisher in 2016, one of the franchise's numerous stadium plans would have gotten off the ground. There was early optimism when Wolf did sell the team that more money would be spent across the board. What were we thinking about that? John Joseph Fisher is a bumbling, incompetent liar who somehow pinches pennies tighter than Wolf ever did. Name one thing, just one thing, John Fisher has done successfully in his entire life. No, you don't have anything yet? That's fine. While I wait for you to come up with the answer to that question, here are some of the awful things he's done over the years. Fisher has spent an ungodly amount of money on conservative candidates and causes, almost all of which would benefit him directly, an alleged billionaire who is only rich because his parents died. The bald douche is also a massive supporter of charter schools, one of America's biggest scams. On the field, Fisher has purposely made the team bad while jacking up ticket prices so he can play the victim card and act as if Oakland A's fans don't care about the team. This is really, I think, the biggest difference between Davis and Cohen and Fisher. There is malice behind John Fisher's actions. When the Raiders were terrible, it was mostly due to Davis's hubris and thinking that people would just be cool with his harebrained schemes while he pretended to be an NFL general manager. Cohen was just an incompetent fool who somehow made money in cable television and thought he could play NBA owner. Fisher is just as incompetent as those two, but he's also a little evil mixed in. For example, he has made the A's bad and let the Coliseum deteriorate out of spite. His goal at this point is to simply stick it to Oakland officials who didn't bend over backwards to give him everything he wanted. That's despite the reality the Gap Air made no effort to meet them in the middle. Let's go back to that question I asked earlier. Did you ever figure out something Fisher has done successfully in his life? What's that? You didn't? That's okay, we'll move on. In order to understand how Oakland became home to sports' most miserable owners, you must also go back to how each market started off in the franchise. The Raiders were there first as an AFL side. The Seals showed up in 1967, but Northern California wasn't quite ready for hockey just yet, and they moved on a decade later. The A's moved to Oakland in 1968 after a brief sojourn in Kansas City, while the Warriors showed up in 1971 after traveling the Bay in search of the home. Since the Raiders were there first, let's start with Davis. Al Davis thought he was smarter than he actually was. However, if you wanted to be in the Raiders business, you had to put up with this. Oakland was far from the only entity to deal with his antics over the years. Why he was allowed to do this despite never being a majority owner of the franchise is a good question, and one that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. But he's hardly the first con man to get away with shady dealings in US history. The Golden State Warriors, or as they were known back then, the San Francisco Warriors, were bought by Franklin Muley in 1961, who moved the team to the Bay Area from Philadelphia. He was part of this really large ownership group who had good intentions by and large, but never really had the financial backing to create a sustainably successful NBA team. Former Milwaukee Bucks owner Jim Fitzgerald and a partner purchased the franchise in 1986 from that large ownership group and were a safe pair of hands. However, they had no real ties to the Bay Area and would just end up selling to Cohen a decade later. Now, Cohen did have ties to California and the Bay Area, but he was just a person who was not fit to be a sports owner. Meanwhile, the Oakland A's suffered a lot of misfortune regarding their ownership. Charles O. Finley was forced to sell the team in 1980 due to a divorce. Walter A. Haas would purchase the franchise, and he was an outstanding locally based owner, but his death in 1995 led to the team being sold to Stephen Schott and Ken Hoffman. They hung around long enough to usher in the Moneyball era for the franchise before selling the team on to Lou Wolf in 2005, who 11 years later would give up his stake to John Fisher. Ultimately, Oakland became home to sports' most miserable owners because it was unlucky more than anything else. Al Davis swindled his way into control of the Raiders. Cohen just happened to be flush with cash when the Warriors were on the market, and Haas's passing saw the A's fall into the hands of a series of owners who didn't have the money or vision required to make the franchise a success. People blame Oakland for teams leaving when in reality the city has been burned with a collection of awful owners who weren't able to tap into all of the advantages Northern California offers. Fans have had no recourse, no ability to change the terrible situations their beloved franchises have found themselves in over the years. What's more, Oakland fans by and large have stuck it out through these terrible ownership groups, jeering Oakland fans, saying that city, that region, that town doesn't deserve a team. It is bullshit. We should celebrate Oakland and its fans for putting up with so much crap over the years. Because I'm telling you this, folks, those East Coast fairweather fans who just want to bitch about things, they would not have stuck it out through everything Oakland has been through in the past 20 years. That does it for me. I'm Cheyenne Hollis. This is the Touchback, and as always, hashtag take it out to the 25.